Welcome to the Heart Centered Life podcast, a podcast that helps you cultivate a life where intellect, emotion, and intuition align. Each week, we bring you tools, resources, or guests to help you find that space where your true happiness resides and encourage you to meet the world's deep hunger from that place. Because we truly believe that when your deep happiness meets the world's deep hunger, miracles happen. I'm your host, Elena Boyd. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Heart Centered Life podcast, where we believe that it is so important to align one's emotions, intellect, and intuition so that we can live and lead more effectively. With that in mind, we aim to bring on to the audience guest speakers who can talk to us about exactly what that looks like, the alignment of intellect, intuition, and emotion. So today we have with us in the studio an author, Sean Rosenthal, and he wrote the book, The School of Intentional Living, and he is also the founder of the Intentional Living Academy. Now, Sean has a deep passion for helping people achieve their dreams, and he works with them and help them move towards living the lives that they want and desire, and as he says it, deserve. So Sean lives in Dallas right now with his wife, Karen, and they have 3 young, beautiful children. And we are so honored and delighted to have Sean with us here in the studio today. So Sean, welcome.
Lena, thank you so much for that nice introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here with you this morning.
All right. So Sean, we've talked before this interview a couple of times, and I'm really intrigued by what you do. So why don't we start by having you tell us a little bit about your background? And a lot of that is it's in the introduction to your book. But why don't you just tell us how you got to be where you currently are right now?
Sure. Well, I had an interesting experience in my late 20s. In fact, I went bankrupt about a month before my wedding. And prior to that event, which really shifted me, I grew up with this very conventional idea of success, right? So success equaled possessions, success equaled status, big homes, fancy cars, fun toys. And that was really my pursuit for nearly the first 3 decades of my life. I was very fortunate to graduate school with a degree in entrepreneurship, thought I knew everything, started my business, still think I do know everything some days, but most days I'm smart enough to know I don't. but started my first business in my early 20s, thought I had it all figured out, and wanted to become a millionaire at age 25. That was really my single pointed focus. And when I didn't accomplish that, I ended up making some very negligent, careless decisions in an effort to accelerate my wealth before I hit age 30.
Right.
And those decisions led to my bankruptcy. And that bankruptcy was a real wake-up call, Alina, because my identity was tied to my net worth, right? My identity was tied to all
this
of the
idea
material,
of success.
Yes, this conventional idea of success. And it was tied to all these material possessions I had surrounded myself with. So when I went bankrupt, it was a real wake-up call in the sense that I really did lose my identity, and it gave me an opportunity to sit back and do a little bit of inventory, I think, for the first time in my life. And what I recognized then was I wasn't only financially bankrupt, I was physically bankrupt, mentally, emotionally bankrupt, spiritually bankrupt. I mean, I really felt like a failure in many areas of my life.
Yeah.
And I think to a certain degree, that's what this pandemic is doing for a lot of people. a lot of us are losing our jobs or losing loved ones or losing just something as simple as the day-to-day certainty in our routines, right?
Right.
So I think that that's happening for a lot of us. I know early in the year when all this hit, like so many of us are going through, like I experienced that again, that sense of being out of control.
Yeah.
And so that really shifted me. That event was a very big pivotal moment in my life. And I always looked at school as sort of like a waste of time. I was a C average student at best. I never appreciated my time in the formal education system. And what I began to appreciate was some of the foundational lessons that school actually provided to all of us. And I started to learn again. And I learned with a new sense of purpose. I started recognizing that, wow, I have so much room for growth. I have addictions that I need to overcome. I have relationships I need to repair. I have, I'm broke, so I have to dig out and start all over again in that category. And what I found really exciting was I started learning and I started reading books and I basically discovered personal development. And I could actually learn and apply things that were relevant to my life at the time. Whereas back in school, I remember thinking like, I'm learning all these facts and statistics and all this stuff, and I'm trying to regurgitate what I'm learning on a test, and then I'm forgetting about it. So it
Yeah.
really turned me off. But then in my late 20s, when I had no choice because I had I had this big hole to dig out of in every facet of my life, I started appreciating learning and I got hooked on it. I got really addicted to, wow, I can learn something, apply it in my life, and get instant results based on what do I focus on at the right time in the right order. So I eventually developed a bit of a framework for what I would call intentional living. I've been obsessed with this idea of intentional living for the last decade since my bankruptcy, because for the first 3 decades of my life, I was living so unintentionally and so carelessly and complacently, and I really didn't have a purpose. And I find that a lot of people struggle with this. I learned that, Viktor Frankl, the author of Man's Search for Meaning, one of my favorite books of all time, he talks about this existential vacuum, and it's this place in life where we are void of meaning. And it's a very dangerous place to be. And I think for many of us that grow up with this conventional idea of success and, just achieving for achievement's sake, some of us transition from what I would call like the morning of your life to the afternoon of your life. And in the afternoon of your life, things are different. Your values shift, your priorities shift. And when we're operating in the afternoon of our life from the playbook from our life's morning, we can get really lost and we can begin to start feeling like we're going through the motions and we're drifting and we're just not sure where this is all leading to. So I wanted to write this book as almost a guide, as a map, and I really wrote it with my children in mind because I figured, if at some point in time in their lives, if they're feeling like they're lost, like I once did, I'd really like to guide them and give them a map out of the woods, a framework they can use to start discovering their own answers that are unique to their lives, to their situation, their circumstance. And that's really where the book came from. And I kind of kept them in mind, frankly. Like, they say when you write a book, you have to have your ideal reader in mind. And that was difficult for me because I've, in my experience, intentional living is more of a psychographic. It's a mindset. It's not so much a demographic or a geographic necessarily, but it's more of a shift in values. And it's more of this internal shift in mindset. So I really wrote the book with them in mind. And that was a neat thing because it kept me honest. It kept me authentic. It kept me, very transparent. And I just wanted to, almost do the best I could to make sure that if my, future children ever picked up this book one day, that they would be proud of me.
Yeah, I love that, Sean, and I think they probably will be because it's such a good book.
Well,
Um,
thank you.
you had mentioned earlier, as you were talking about your background and what led you to write the book, um, and you had said something about being not just financially bankrupt, but also spiritually and emotionally bankrupt. what does that feel like? So how would someone know, right? So a lot of us are living daily lives. How do we know that we are in a space where we are living without intention, right? Or as you say, without a concerted you know decision about how you want to live your life, um and being spiritually and emotionally bankrupt and not even knowing it. So how do we know that we are in that space?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the big signals or indicators for me, and the more people I work with, the more I recognize this pattern or trend, is many years ago I got stuck asking myself this question of, what is my purpose? What is the meaning of my life? Where is this all going? What am I doing this for? And that's a tricky situation to be in, because for me, in my experience, I got wrapped up in that question. And for many years, I would kind of ponder that and wonder that. And that question, asking it that way, unfortunately doesn't really produce great answers. So in order to overcome that, if some of us are feeling that way and we're asking ourselves incessantly, what is my purpose? Where is this all going? What's the meaning of all of this? What really helped me, Alina, was when I added two very simple words to the end of that sentence structure, because, a lot of people say, well, if you want better answers, ask yourself a better question. So I began to ask myself, what is my purpose right now? And when I added those two simple words to the end of that sentence, it helped me to ground me in the present moment.
I love that.
Yeah, and it helped me to focus on what was right in front of me and stop incessantly wondering or worrying about my future, or dwelling and stressing and being depressed about my past. It helped me to focus on the present moment, because if you think about it, as like Eckhart Tolle suggests in The Power of Now, right? The present moment is all we have. The
Right.
past is nothing more than present moments that have already occurred. The future is nothing more than present moments that haven't taken place yet. And so, to the degree that we can ground ourselves in the present moment, we'll be more centered, we'll be more focused, we'll be less distracted. And what was amazing about that, Alina, was I started to really appreciate and understand the power of the compound effect. So, the more I could ground myself in the present moment, mentally, physically, spiritually, the more I experience this thing I would call the compound effect. So the more centered you can be and the more present you can be, those minutes and those hours and those days and weeks and months and quarters and years, they start to really stack one on top of the other. And you can start to really experience progress in so many different areas of your life when you can remain present. And the other thing too is, like, I used to, I value clarity. I think a lot of us value clarity. Like, we want to know where it's all going. We want clarity into the next step if we're pursuing a project or a goal. And one of the things I also recognized was the importance of, like, okay, maybe I don't know what it is I want now. So many people, 99 out of 100 people, adults, if you ask them, what do you truly want out of your life? So many of us struggle to answer that question with specificity and clarity. And I always say, like, if you don't have clarity and you value it and you want it, like, start there. Like, what do I really want out of my life? Clarity. And all of a sudden, when you focus in on that thing called clarity, you'll start to find it in your environment. The right solutions that help you with that thing called clarity will start showing up. The right people will start showing up. Maybe the finances will finally come through, whatever it is. So we have to focus on what it is we want. And if we don't know what we want, then we have to start there and say, what I want is clarity as far as, what am I doing with my life? What's this next thing? How am I going to get out of this current situation and overcome this struggle? Sometimes if we just identify that what we want is a clear path, or what we want is clarity into the next steps, those answers will begin to show up for us.
I love that, Sean, because it's so succinct, right? It
Mhm.
keeps you grounded in the moment, and you're asking questions that can yield almost immediate answers. It's not as if you're asking a question where the answer will come, 2 days, 2 months from the time you ask it, right? So I love what you just said, asking a question about how can I get clarity about this issue right at the moment.
Right.
Um, yeah, which brings me to another thing that you said earlier. I asked you about, how do you know when you're in a position where you may be emotionally or spiritually bankrupt, and you say that it's a place where you don't know what your purpose is, right? And if you can somehow find a way to shift that that mindset and kind of center yourself in the moment, in the now, um, that's one way to achieve that mindset shift and move from bankruptcy to, I guess, abundance. um, and I just wanted to share something that came to mind when you were talking about that. My mother recently sent me a short video, like a 2-minute video of a priest in the Philippines who actually had lung cancer and then recovered. So when he was recovering in that process, he would write short prayers. And one of the prayers that he read in the video that my mom sent me was one that he wrote when he was sick. And the prayer would go something like, I'm paraphrasing a lot of it, but it would say something like, Lord, when I'm angry, make me smile, or,
Mm,
God, when I'm frustrated, make me smile.
mm,
God, when I'm sad, make me smile. God, when I feel like there's no way around this issue, make me smile. Um, and for me, just listening to that prayer, there was an immediate shift. Like I could feel it. I felt myself smiling just listening to the prayer. Um, and it was immediate. It was in the moment. It was right then. Um, and I think you can let me know what you think. But it sounds as if we can find something that might center us and ground us in the moment, that's when that shift can happen. Correct?
I think so. It's such a small, simple thing, isn't it? But at the same time, it's such a powerful and effective thing. And I think that prayer is beautiful. I love that. It reminds me a lot of the prayer of Saint Francis,
Mm,
right? That
yeah.
starts out as where there's hatred, let me sow love. So it's
Right.
very similar to that. And I think those types of prayers are so empowering because they help us shift our train of thought before it leaves the station. Right?
Right. Right.
I'm
I
a
like
big
that. Yeah.
believer in this idea that the power of our minds create our reality. So I'm a big fan of anything like that that helps us redirect these patterns, these trains of thought that have been running over and over and over again for so many years. Those are habitual patterns of thought. So I love what you just mentioned about that prayer. And absolutely, it is so powerful because it just helps us to catch those types of thought patterns before they run incessantly wild, because we all know that we can get caught up in, worry or stress or anxiety, and we can spend, we all have an emotional home. So we can spend a lot of time there if we're not careful, if we don't have the awareness for how some of these thought patterns are running incessantly in our minds. If we don't have that awareness, it's unconscious, right? And there's no opportunity for us to bring ourselves back to the present and ground ourselves and center ourselves so that we can, use this, you know, God-given gift. I think that I would consider it called life, you
Right.
know.
I I did want to ask you a follow-up question to that. So you work with a lot of people, and you provide them with advice, you coach them, you guide them, and you're also the founder of the Intentional Living Academy. What do you think is the greatest problem you see that people face today? The people who come and see you, what's the most difficult and challenging problem that many of us face?
I think it's a great question. I think at a very fundamental or foundational level, there was a book written years ago by Bronnie Ware called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying.
Yeah.
And she was just this incredible palliative care nurse who worked with her patients in the final weeks of their lives. And after hundreds of conversations, she recognized these top 5 regrets. And the number one regret of the dying that she heard most often and most frequently was this: I wish I would have lived a life. I wished I would have the courage to live a life that was true to myself and not the life that others expected of me. So I think the way that we're brought up, I think from, culturally, from society, religion, influences, environments, peers, parents, whatever it is, like all those influences, I would hope for many people were very positive. But at some point in time during our maturity process, as we enter adulthood and what I would say the afternoon of our lives, at some point in time, we have to figure it out for ourselves. And I think that's one of the biggest problems is there's such biased and influential agendas out there. There's been a few people in my life, I can count them on one hand, that have been guides for me, that have really provided me with an unbiased framework or guidance to really help me what understand what's true for me, help me understand what I truly want based on my circumstances, my history, my experience, my unique situation. And I'll be forever grateful for those types of people. And I think that's one of the issues is no one really teaches us how to get what we want out of our lives based on our own unique circumstances. So
Yeah.
that there's very little unbiased guidance out there. I oftentimes tell my clients, look, my only agenda, my singular agenda is to help you achieve yours. And of course I have my rules, right? Like it's got to be good, whatever you're looking to do, whether it's something in
Right.
business, something financially, something in your relationship, whatever it
Yeah.
is,
The
you're all
agenda cannot be to rob a bank.
exactly. So,
Right.
we've got to do an ecology check here is what I would
Right.
call it, right? Like it's got to be good for you, good for the people around you. It's got to be good for, the community as a whole, good for the world. One of the ways that I define intentional living, I mean, I have so much to say about it and I won't bore you with it, but I think it's important for each and every one of us to define our own definitions of success, to really take the time and discover what we define success looks like for us, for each and every one of us. And, what does intentional living look like for me? I mean, for one person, it looks a lot different than the next, and it would look differently for me. But personally, at the end of the day, like I would define it as, leaving this world in better condition than when you arrived. I grew up and although I don't remember my grandmother, she passed when I was still very young. But the one thing I do remember is when I was very young, 5, 6 years old, like we used to run into a room, destroy it and leave. And she'd be like, wait a minute, don't leave a room in worse condition than when you, entered it. And I kind of used her guidance and I used that room as a metaphor for the world. And each and every day, the way I go about my life is I'd like to think that, each and every day I'm doing something just really little. It doesn't have to be big, but I'm just doing my part, my piece to make this world a better place and to leave it in better condition than when I arrived. And I think if more of us would operate that way, evolution would take place faster. It would be accelerated. I think if all of us carried ourselves like that, because I think if we're looking for purpose, like I've discovered, I've read so many books on discovering purpose and what that means and intentional living. Like I mentioned, I've obsessed over it, and I've found that the deepest purpose, like the most meaningful type of purpose, is found in service to others.
Right.
So I think for me, I kind of went about the first 3 decades of my life with this what's in it for me mindset. And then I had this shift in my late 20s, and I started to realize, wow, I'm about to be responsible for another human being, my fiance. And here she is talking about someday raising a family. And I'm thinking, how in the world am I going to take responsibility for her and our future family when I can't even be responsible for myself? So I kind of went from this place of what's in it for me, this very selfish, this very careless place, to, okay, how may I serve?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I like that, Sean, and that's so profound. What the shift that happens from being me centered to other centered usually happens when there's a crisis, right? When something threatens, something happens that threatens someone or something that you care about, right? So,
Mhm.
being aware that you have another human being that you have to care for, getting married, being a parent, right? Losing a loved one, um, and the pandemic that we are currently going through. I mean, that's another, external event that has caused a lot of shifts from me centered to other centered and a lot of people.
Mhm.
Um, do you have any suggestions or ideas to help people do that before that crisis happens? How do you teach or help people see that being me centered isn't going to be productive in the long run and help
Yeah, it's
them?
a good question. It's an interesting thing. So when it comes to intentional living, I find that there are two types of people. The first category of people, I'd say, are like this slow burn category. The slow burn category describes people who kind of feel like they might have a calling. They feel like they're playing small. They feel like they could kind of play life on a bigger stage, and they've got more to contribute, more to give, but maybe they're comfortable, or maybe they don't have the confidence yet to go out and do this thing, whatever it is. So they've kind of got this slow burn. And I think that's very important to have awareness for that and to recognize it, because that could be purpose tapping you on the shoulder. That could be the
Right.
fall. That could be the beginning of this shift. And then to your point, Alina, you've got this other category of people who have like what I would call an inciting incident. And an inciting incident, like that's like that event in the movies in the first like 90 seconds where there's like this massive explosion, the
Right.
hero's life is in peril, and you get sucked into the story and you're rooting the hero on. So for many people, there's a massive incident, a loss of a loved one, a loss of a job. They get into an accident, like they go through this serious struggle and this serious adversity. So usually I find that those are the two categories of people that are attracted to this idea of intentional living. But it kind of goes back to wondering about purpose, because I used to think that purpose, like I had this misconception that purpose would come find me. Like I would walk out the door and I would get slammed in the face by a pile of bricks called purpose, you know?
Right.
And I'd sit back, dormant. I'd sit idle and sit back, and I would admire all these people that had these massive stories of adversity and struggle. And it was like, wow, that person's so purposeful because they lost their limbs in an accident, or that person's so purposeful because they lost a child. And I think that's a dangerous mindset to have, because I eventually figured, I don't want my purpose to find me. It's like,
Right.
I don't want to struggle like they've struggled. I want to be proactive. I want to go seek it. I want to go be, looking for it. I think I'm very mortality motivated. I oftentimes, like, my entire experience led me to this belief that in our final moments, many of us will wonder if we passed or failed at this beautiful thing we called life. And I know that for me, in my final moments, I don't want to wonder. I don't want to live with regret looking back. I don't want to have any of the top 5 regrets of the dying in that book by Bronnie Ware. So, like, what could I do today, right now, so that I can hopefully minimize some of those feelings at the end? So I can be at the end of my life and think, wow, I passed this life with flying colors. I did the best I could with what I had. I used my time wisely. I leveraged my God given talents and abilities to my fullest capacity. I made a difference in the lives of those I lead, love, and serve. Like those are some of the feelings that I want to have at the end. So I eventually said, well, I'm not going to sit back and wait. I too experienced that slow burn for many, many years, and how that translated in my life in my 20s. And frankly, in my teenage years, was I was just trying to fill a void. I was, I was addicted severely to tobacco. I would black out 4 nights of the week due to alcohol consumption. I mean, I was kind of a hot mess. Still am some days, but I was trying to fill this empty void with substances and possessions. I was using what I would call negative vehicles to try to fill that void. So I sat back and I reflected and I said, well, here's the good news. I'm alive and I want to feel good. I think that's very noble, and I think that's very admirable for everybody to want to feel good. And I said, but here's the problem. The vehicles I'm using to feel good are very disempowering. They're very limiting. They come with severe consequences. And I'm burned out over here. I've lost my connection with my higher power, whether that's God, universal intelligence source, whatever you call it. I've lost my spiritual connection. I'm emotionally and mentally a wreck. I'll do anything I can to escape boredom or numb my nerves. Physically, I'm not doing well physically. I'm overweight. I'm fatigued. It's like something needs to change here. And what I discovered was there are other vehicles that I could use to get me from point A to point B. So if I want to feel good, gosh, I don't need anything else outside of me in the external world. I can sit quietly for 10 minutes in a meditation, and that vehicle can get me to my destination. And it actually has very empowering consequences. It actually helps me all day. It helps me feel good. It doesn't come with a hangover. It doesn't come with the risk of getting mouth cancer, throat cancer, lung cancer. So I think for people who are experiencing that slow burn, appreciate where you are, be more compassionate, be more patient with yourself, and recognize that awareness is the first step. That awareness could just be your calling, your tap on the shoulder, that you were designed and born and built to do more, to contribute more, to serve at a higher level than you've been serving in the past. And I would say to those people, have appreciation, have gratitude, because there are so many people who live their entire lives and they may not even experience that feeling until their final moments, and it's too late. So be grateful that you're having those emotions, that you're having those feelings, those experiences wherever you are in life, because what that's telling you is that there's still time. There's still sand left in your hourglass to make a shift and to start making the impact or the difference that you can make in the world.
I love that, Sean. That's really good. So the metaphor, of having a ton of bricks with the the word purpose written on it hitting you. I mean that drives the point that you were trying to make so close to home. And comparing that with the slow burn process, and the quiet tap on the shoulder, and I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier about being in the moment, right? Being grateful for where you are right now, finding the joy in the moment. Um, it's a good way to getting on the path to finding purpose. And it kind of reminds me of a quote that I love. I love this quote from Frederick Beckner, and he says, he was an Episcopalian priest, and he says this. Again, I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but essentially what he's saying is that the place God calls you to, your calling, is the place where your deepest happiness meets the world's deepest hunger. And if you can come to that space, that's where your true calling is. It's not a place where you are serving without finding that joy, because then you get burnt out, right? And you're not at a place where you are finding joy without doing any kind of uh, without even checking what's happening around you and noticing that there are people around you that may be suffering, and trying to elevate that suffering. That leads to selfishness, right? And that special place where God uniquely calls you to is where your own unique joy or happiness is able to meet, where you see is the world's deepest hunger, from your eyes. And I think that what you've just said is so aligned with what with the spirit behind what Frederick Beckner said.
I love that, Alina. And I think that's one of the frames of your entire podcast. Am I right? I mean, I just heard you.
Yes.
I just heard you say that in the intro to your last podcast. I love that
Yeah.
idea. Yep. I love that.
Yeah. um what's your hope for, we've talked a lot about how you got to where you are and how you see the world as it unfolds before you right now. What's your hope for the future, for yourself and for the people that you work with and for society as a whole?
Yeah, I feel so blessed that I've gotten to the point in time. I've been privately coaching individuals and groups for about 6 years.
Wow.
And it was recommended to me many, many times to write a book. Now, I'm an avid reader. However, I've never written a book. So every time that got suggested, of course, my brain quickly wanted to keep me safe. And it said, well, there's no way you can write a book. Who am I? So I feel so blessed and grateful that, I actually took action and moved forward with one of my dreams, which was to write and publish a book earlier this year. And I'm also grateful that I'm beginning to build my business around this idea of intentional living. Everybody says, well, you have to find a niche, you have to get deeper in, you have to do all these things. And I listened to a lot of that for many years, and it kept me dormant, it kept me safe. And I finally got outside of my head this year and move forward. And I'm so grateful I did. I mean, the book, we were amazed. The book, with much help, we had some great people in our advanced reader campaign. We had an unbelievable launch team. Publishing and marketing a book is definitely one of those things where it's like it takes a village. But we've sold now, I believe we're about 3 months in, and I think about 3,500 copies have sold thus far, which I'm thrilled with. I'm self-published. So
That's
for a
amazing.
little, yeah, for a little guy,
Congratulations. Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, for a little guy like me, I'm like, wow, that's just incredible. And we've had so many people enroll in our programs and come participate in our 5-day challenges on Facebook. And we have this acceleration program, which is like a very tight-knit community, very intimate group coaching for people that are purpose-driven and looking to live more intentionally. So the hope for me is, I've had quite a few businesses over the years, and this is by far the most rewarding business that I've ever participated in. It's one of those things where, time doesn't exist when I'm doing what I love best, whether that's writing, training, speaking, working one-on-one or with a group setting. It's like time doesn't even exist anymore. So I'm definitely in that sweet spot. So my hope is that I can continue sustainably growing the business over the next few years. I have a lot of different it's funny, Alina, but as I started the writing process, like 8 additional book ideas came to mind. So I'm like writing the book. I've been reading, I read about a book a week. I'm a very avid reader, and I've been reading for so long. A lot of the expert authors out there are like, hey, if you're a reader, if you read often, you know what good writing looks like, and you can be a writer too. And I have a lot more ideas for books that would potentially be available in the future. I'm going to stick to what this intentional living, I think this deserves 2 to 3 years of my single pointed focus, because I really do believe that it's needed and it's necessary for right now. And I think that the work is important. I'm finally involved with a business of my own where I have the confidence and the belief that the work is important enough to pursue with reckless abandon. And I've always had businesses for business sake. I've always had businesses that, will make money and will turn a profit and support my family and our financial goals. But I've never really had a business that truly makes an impact, a very deep, meaningful impact in the lives of others. And that to me is very rewarding, because it's like I feel so blessed. I'm able to do what I love and also make money and make a difference at the same time. So that blend of impact and income is something that I'm not used to. And I'm really enjoying the process. And I'm really grateful for all the readers, all the people who have bought the book and come along on the journey with me. I'm grateful for all the students that I've been, blessed to teach over the years. And that's what I hope continues. If I can continue to contribute to other people in that capacity, for me, Alina, that frankly, that's a dream come true.
That's an awesome dream to have, Sean. How can people reach out to you if they are interested in everything that you've just described just now?
Yeah, thank you. So my website is seanrosensteel.com. Hopefully you can put that in the show notes so I don't waste time here
Yes,
spelling that out.
yes.
But
I just like to give guests the opportunity to invite people to connect with them directly.
awesome. Awesome. Yeah, so it's seanrosensteel.com. And actually I have a promotion going on right now where you can get a free signed paperback, just pay a small fee for shipping and handling. If you do that, you also get discounts to the audiobook and the Kindle version. So all of the information's on my website. If you want to join me on an upcoming challenge, if you want to take a look at the online course, the Intentional Living Academy, you can do so there. I'm also launching a virtual book club, which I'm really excited about. I've been doing a book club with some very, what I'd call my inner circle for many, many years. And I'm launching a virtual book club now that I think, everyone knows how to do Zoom. And I'm typically reading some pretty neat books that are very impactful, on a spiritual, mental, emotional, entrepreneurship level. So I'm launching a book club shortly. Otherwise, if you're interested in the book, I'm available anywhere books are sold, whether that's, whatever you prefer, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc. You can find my book.
Yep, and I'm gonna put all that in the show notes as well, so people can easily access it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, Sean, I want to say thank you for coming on the show. You've been, a valuable source of information and wisdom, and help to, I think, people who are listening in and trying to figure out, how to get a more purposeful, and how to kind of navigate the terrain of life to come to a more purposeful and intentional way of living. So I want to say thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom and your experience and being so open and honest about your own journey. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Alina. The pleasure is all mine. And I love what you're doing here. So anything I can do to support you in your podcast, please let me know.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Heart Centered Life podcast. Make sure to visit our website, www.elinabord.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. If you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. Be sure to check out some of our programs on how to cultivate, create, communicate, and inspire others from a heart-centered space. Tune in next week for our next episode where we will help you find a place of deep happiness so that you can meet the world's deep hunger and watch miracles unfold.